Okay, so let's go ahead and talk through this, right? So the first one we are going to do, this is the plant-wide, right? Which means we use the totals. So what's our numerator for the plant-wide if we're trying to figure out the predetermined overhead rate?
1.4 million.
Good. Right, so that's this total here. And then what's our denominator? What are we using to allocate?
80,000.
Right, so it tells us we're using direct labor hours, right? We use direct labor hours to allocate. So we should end up with $17.50 per direct labor hour. Okay. Right, and then step 2 is we're going to allocate to job Bravo. And so we use that $17.50 per direct labor hour. And what do we multiply that by?
14.
14, good. So we're going to look in the total column, right? And total direct labor hours are 14. Good. So you should get that the amount of overhead that we're allocating to job Bravo is $245 when we use the plant-wide rate. Okay. Questions? Everybody okay? Okay, so then next we're going to do it based on departmental totals. Okay, so we're going to look at each department separately. So if we go to figure out assembly, what would my numerator be for assembly?
1,400,000.
So we're splitting it up by department. So what is the total estimated manufacturing costs in assembly?
600,000.
Right, the 600,000. And then how do we allocate assembly costs? What does it tell us here? We use direct labor hours as the allocation base in assembly and machine hours as the allocation base in fabrication. So what is my denominator for assembly?
50,000.
Right, 50,000, this right here. Right, and this is why I write down the units, just so I keep this straight that I'm using direct labor hours. And you should get 12 per direct labor hour. Okay. So then I'm going to allocate overhead from assembly to job Bravo. So I'm going to take that 12 per direct labor hour. And what do I multiply it by? Right. We know that it's per direct labor hour. So how many direct labor hours did we spend in assembly for this job?
11.
Right, 11, right? Direct labor hours for assembly, we spent 11. Okay. Right, so this is saying that of the estimated 600,000 that we expect to have in overhead costs for assembly for the whole period, right, we are going to allocate $132 of that to this job. Okay, and we're going to do the same exact thing for fabrication. So what is my numerator going to be to figure out the predetermined overhead rate for fabrication going to be?
800,000.
Right, I'm going to pull it from here. Right, and so notice, right, if we do it plant-wide, we get the whole 1.4. If we break it down by department, these two numbers have got to equal that 1.4. Otherwise, you did something wrong. Okay. And then what would my denominator be? Is my denominator going to be direct labor hours or machine hours here?
Machine hours.
Right, machine hours. And how many do we expect to spend in fabrication?
100,000.
Right, that's our expected is 100,000. And so you get $8 per machine hour. And then we're going to allocate it to the job. So it's $8 per machine hour. And how many machine hours did we spend in fabrication for this job?
6.
Good, 6 right here. Okay, so you get 48 hours from the fabrication costs allocated to job Bravo. So your total manufacturing overhead allocated to this job is going to be the sum of these two numbers. So you get 180. Now, we haven't dealt with this before where, I don't think, where we have different allocation bases, right? And this sort of makes sense. Like assembly requires that people put stuff together. And so it requires, direct labor hours. It requires people to put stuff together. Whereas fabrication is usually machines like molding something out of plastic or out of metal. And so this one is based on machine hours. Okay. I would never make you guess, but just be aware that the predetermined overhead rate, the allocation base could change within one factory. Okay. So which one do you think is a more accurate allocation? Do you think the one that's based on the plant-wide numbers or the one that's specific to departments? Which one do you think is more accurate?
The department numbers.
Yeah, for sure. Right. This one is more detailed, right? It looks more specifically at each department. So this one is going to be a more accurate representation of costs. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Are we doing okay? Okay. So we've got one more to do. Right, and we'll just walk through this one together. Okay, so this one, it has a job order costing system with a plant-wide predetermined overhead rate based on machine hours. Okay, so we're not going to do it by department. At the beginning of the year, the company made the following estimates, right? So the predetermined overhead rate is always based on estimates that happen at the beginning of the year. And so the requirements are, they want us to figure out the predetermined overhead rate. They give us a job and they want us to find the total manufacturing cost, the unit product cost, the sales price, and then they want us to talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to go through the 5-step process, that we just talked about, and that will answer all of our questions. Okay. So number 1, predetermined overhead rate. Can anybody tell me what are the numbers that are going to go in the numerator?
650,000.
Okay, so we have the 650,000. That's the fixed component of manufacturing overhead. Do we have a variable component in this problem?
Yeah, $3.
Right. So do I just add $3?
No, you have to multiply it to the machine hours required.
Right. This is saying variable MOH per machine hour, and then this is the number of machine hours required to support that. So, right, this wouldn't, just so we know, right, that wouldn't make sense, right? 650,000 plus $3, that seems silly. So we have to make sure that we multiply it by the activity level. So it's 100,000 machine hours. Good, so this is my fixed component, this is my variable component. And then what am I going to divide by?
The 100,000 again.
Right. Right, we divide by the estimated activity level, and that's 100,000. Right, remember when there's a variable component, this number is going to show up here, and it's also going to show up here. Did anybody do the math?
9.5.
Good. So I'm going to make sure that I make note of the unit. So it's 950 per machine hour. Okay. So that's step one. So then step two, right, we're going to apply MOH to job 400, right? That's what it's telling me this job is called. So I take the 950 per machine hour, and what do I multiply that by?
40.
Right, so down here we start looking at the job information, and we spent 40 hours. So I multiply that by 40 machine hours. And so out of all of these estimated overhead costs, I'm going to apply $380 to this job. So just so you know, I'm going in the steps that I gave you earlier. This one doesn't completely answer question 2. That's going to be the next step, right? So the next step is computing the total manufacturing cost. So total manufacturing cost of job 400. Right, and you guys told me earlier the total manufacturing cost is direct labor plus direct materials plus applied overhead. Do we know any of these numbers?
Yes, 450 and 210.
Right, good. Right, they tell me for this job, these are my costs. And what's my applied overhead?
380.
Yeah, like all these numbers, they just move on to the next step, right? So this is 380. Right, so the total cost for this job is 1,040. So this answers question or requirement number 1. Requirement number 2 is compute the total manufacturing cost. That's this. Okay. And then it wants the unit product cost. So what am I going to do here?
We divide 1040 by 52.
Right, perfect. So if that's our total manufacturing cost, and we know that we made 52 units, we're just going to divide. And we should get $20 per unit. Right, so that answers requirement number 3. Okay, and then step 5 is figuring out the sales price. Right, and the sales price is just going to be the cost plus whatever markup we decide on. So, right, we know that it's costing us $20 per unit to make whatever this is. And then we need to mark it up, right? So we get some sort of profit. And they're saying that our markup percentage is 120% of its total manufacturing cost. So the markup is 120% times $20 per unit. That's the same as saying 1.2 times 20, right? That's the same thing. And so what number do we get here? What is 120% of 20?
24.
24, good. So just to be clear, right, this is the amount of the markup. Don't forget to add the markup to the cost. Okay, the markup is the amount that you add to the cost to get to the sales price. So the sales price is going to be 44. So Eden, does that help with any confusion you had on figuring out the sales price?
Yes, that clears up some confusion.
Okay, good. Right, so this is going to be the amount that we charge. Okay. And then the last question is just saying, if they hired you as a consultant to critique in pricing methodology, what would you say? Does anybody have any thoughts on how they're pricing their units? No thoughts. So I guess what I would say here is, remember we decided that departmental manufacturing, or splitting things up so that there's a predetermined overhead rate by department, is more accurate than doing it plant-wide, which this one is plant-wide. So this maybe not be as accurate as we would like, which can mess with your price, right? If your cost isn't right. And then the second thing is, it looks like they're using a standard markup, which many companies don't do that, right? They'll charge different prices to different companies depending on if they have a favored vendor status or not. But anyway, you don't really need to know that. Just know that the plant-wide is less accurate than the departmental calculation. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to take your quietness as a no. So we are going to move on to chapter 3 next week. If you have any questions over the weekend while you're working, let me know. Other than that, have a great weekend.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.